All right, guys, welcome back to the Art Black podcast. I am your host, Art Black. And today I want to talk to you about the unified kayfabe theory of Trump. So Eric Weinstein has been talking recently about kind of kayfabe and Trump, but I have a slightly different take. So I want to expand on his idea and kind of pretend that it was mine. As we talked about in the past, Trump has a very narrative-based view of how the world works. And it seems like he's this guy who's stuck in character, who's constantly playing Trump as a politician. So kayfabe is in old school wrestling, like, not the current stuff where they are basically obviously playing characters and they're allowed to have, real lives outside of that. Old timey wrestling had a set of not just matches, but narrative around the matches, like why these guys were fighting in the first place, that was presented as real. So you had these backstories for people who, in theory, were getting together to fight because they actually hated each other and they wanted to fight, and that's why there was wrestling. So this wasn't just like staying in character like you'd think of an actor. These people would live this narrative throughout their lives. They would have, in some cases, fake backstories for themselves. Their kids would ask them, "Hey, daddy, why does that guy say you hate him?" And they would lie to their kids. Like they would tell them, "Oh, well, because, this and he said that. Now I got to get," like literally. So the kids couldn't break the narrative structure, lie to spouses, lie to their kids. And in extreme cases, like there was a case in 1975 where this plane was traveling to an event and the plane crashed. And the problem was that the wrestlers who were on the plane were mostly from one side, but there was a masked wrestler from the other side who was traveling with them, who's not supposed to be on that plane. Like back then, they didn't even travel together. Like they take separate buses, separate planes, separate hotels. Like there was no like fraternizing. Like they were supposed to be at war at all times. So they roll into the hospital. These guys are all injured. Some of them were permanently like put out of wrestling. And he had to check into the hospital under his real name. So back then, they didn't know who these people were really. It's not like you had the internet to fact check. So he said that, his real name, but then he said he was basically like a wrestling promoter. And so while all the other guys were in the hospital, he basically checked in and then had to leave right away because in order to maintain the story, so his masked identity wasn't revealed, they all stayed in the hospital, but he went on to go wrestle as his masked identity while he was injured from the plane crash to preserve this notion that he wasn't actually on the plane with those guys. And he would deny it in interviews years later. And it would get, even, more in depth than that. You would have these storylines, like a fake storyline in wrestling is called a work. And then if it turned into something real, it's called a shoot. So if you're just filming something real, it's a shoot. If it's something that management made up, it was a work. You would have storylines where you'd have wrestlers like one would maybe like be like having an affair with another wrestler's wife, which would then turn into real because they would get so into character that they would actually like wind up like cheating on each other. You'd have instances where people would, romance and get married and all kinds like divorces, just all kinds of crazy stuff that was all due to the fact that the entire industry revolves around the people who, once you get into the industry, you basically have to keep up the act at all times. And you often have these people who lose sight to a degree as far as when the act starts and stops, because if you're always in character and everyone you're around is always in character, it builds a new reality. It builds this narrative that makes it hard for the human brain to filter when the game stops and when reality starts. And if you're constantly living in a game, that basically is your reality. So with Trump, it's not just that he's in character. And this is, I think, the point that a lot of people miss when they talk about the way that he seems to view the world and these kind of narrative themes where he is acting as though he's this wrestler up there who is, the press is talking to him and he's talking to them like they're, his enemies, and, he's body slamming them and he's talking trash and he's doing whatever. That is part of his act, but that's only a part of it. The real change within the entire GOP and within the GOP voting base is that to the same degree that wrestling does, it's pulled everybody into the act. So this is why you don't have, aside from, for instance, like Mitt Romney, who has his own power base outside the current GOP kayfabe. And even then, as a heel, he serves a purpose. Trump doesn't like the fact that he opposes him, but it's useful for Trump to have enemies because he always has to have an enemy. You can't have this kind of kayfabe narrative structure without an enemy. This is why, even with COVID-19, he calls it the invisible enemy. He tries to refer to it as like a, being at war. He can't treat it in scientific terms like it's just a medical problem, because that's not how he or the people that are with him work. It's not how they think. It's not how they interact with the world. So it has to be an invisible enemy, and there have to be enemy actors like China, people within the CDC, anyone who's not doing their job, other governors who are complaining he's not doing a good enough job. They just turn into enemy wrestlers to him. They're just now heels, and he's the good guy, he's the face, and he's going in there to pile driver him and just do whatever, because that's how they all now see politics, as this kind of extension of not just their economic or social or cultural interests, but it's become this like identity where they gain structure out of pretending that they're part of it. So people like Hannity were early adopters, but you have plenty of other folks who have abandoned their own or their old way of operating. Even like the strict constitutionalists, like Mark Levine or whoever, who didn't like Trump to start, but once they realized that things were changing and the way to stay in the system was to just take on a new role. So you take on a new persona, and a lot of these guys who refused to do that, kind of the never Trumpers, it was fine too. It served an enemy narrative role, so they get to be the bad guys, which Trumpism requires. So within this whole kayfabe structure, you have, what a lot of times people call a cult. You really almost have like a LARPing or a role playing, kind of a cosplay thing where people are dressing up, with a red hat or, whatever the fuck your feelings t-shirts, whatever symbols that they want to do to kind of, self-identify. But they take on whatever, crazy that Trump is saying. And again, much like pro wrestling, knowing it's not true, or suspecting it's not true, or hearing people say it's not true. For years and years, even in the old days, people would always whisper that pro wrestling was fake. Everybody knew it was fake, but a lot of people swore it wasn't fake. So there's always this tension, which is why they tried so hard to maintain the kayfabe. The tension was that you had to try at all times and put out a ton of effort to keep it going. Because if you didn't, it would fall apart. People who would speak out of character, it was big taboo. Like, it wasn't something that was done. And, people that couldn't uphold it didn't last. So where we're at now is understanding that playing into, or even coexisting with this structure that kind of has its narrative hold on people who are now pretending that it's real. They're pretending that Trump is competent, or they're pretending that, any number of things as far as like his policies. If Trump says that, oh, we put up tariffs and tariffs make money and Mexico's paying for the wall and all that. As long as they pretend that it's real, then it's real. It's as real enough as it needs to be for them to stay in the network and continue to get, the benefits of it. They're part of the team. These people, like Laura Ingraham, who, didn't care for Trump when he started, is now this hardcore pro-Trumper, because that's, how you stay in business. So for a lot of these people, much like the wrestling industry took care of these people, the guy who, held up his end in the plane crash, guy worked in the industry forever. Like, all these people who will debase themselves to do whatever's necessary to keep up the pretense, the system will protect you. Like, you will actually have a place. And that's really what we're up against at the moment, is this sphere of people that not only do they want to stay in character, but they're making you and me and everyone else in America and everyone else in the world a character in their narrative. So how we react to them is basically as though we're just other writers who are coming up with our own narrative, that they get to then play off of. They get to say what our motives are or why they're mad at us or anything. I mean, it's whatever gets them to keep the belt. You basically have, note this lovely belt right here, which, I mean, doesn't really seem to fit anybody, but whatever. So I think that that's the thing, that once you kind of wrap your head around that, in that Trump's not crazy per se. This is very deliberate, and it's based off of a very intuitive understanding of why narrative works and why people, and especially people that might be a little bit on the outsides as far as, power or influence or whatever, they just want to roll. Like, they want to have a place in the world. And with like classical conservatism, you could say that, if you did X, Y, and Z, then you were a good person. You would be rewarded, with a Protestant work ethic. You work hard, you get honest pay, you have a good life, and, if bad things happen, you probably deserved it. If good things happen, you probably deserved it. Like, there was kind of a structure and order to it that people really craved. And as that kind of disintegrates, there's an old saying, gosh, I think it was Seneca, that said that most people don't want freedom. Most people want a good master. And this is kind of the same concept, is that people don't really know what they want. They want to be told what to do. And it's sad to say it like that, but that's really what we're looking at with the majority of the current GOP base right now. Is Trump showed up with this idea of, I'm just going to tell them how it is. I'm going to tell them what's going on, who their enemies are, who the good guys are, and give them a kind of cohesive worldview that gives them a role. It lets them play their part as a supporter or as an advocate or whatever. And like, for instance, like the new press secretary, Kaylee McEnnis, who's just utterly shameless. She's been on TV for a while, really angling for this job, like just, I mean, shameless debasing. Finally got the job. So good on you for sticking to your guns and just, I mean, going to no bottom limit to really sell the Trump line at any cost. Because that's the thing, is like, if you stay in character and you play your role, you will be taken care of up to the point where you're not. Which is the other thing. Trump does get bored of people. Like any wrestling stars, eventually they get a little stale. Nobody really survives forever with Trump. He rotates people out. He rotates new ones in. They're rising stars, they're falling stars. People love to see people fall. People love to see people rise. But it still gives them all a chance to play. And that's what's completely alien to folks who are outside that sphere right now, is, you're looking at the world in a more rational sense, as far as, well, we've got these reports of, COVID numbers and this and that. And for Trump, like, you watch these press conferences, he gets mad at reporters because there are some of the few people who have the option to reject his narrative and, interject, reality. And that isn't even something that is necessarily like set in stone. Ideally, for people that operate like Trump, that operate in other countries, are a little bit more, let's say, totalitarian. They just have a press that puts out propaganda, and that's all that you know. Now, what's kind of funny about that is that in a lot of states, especially like totalitarian states, there's like an old kind of Russian joke, as far as like, if I want to know what's going on in Russia, I read American news. If I want to know what's going on in America, I read Russian news, sort of a thing. Like, you don't trust what your own country says about yourself, but you might trust what they're saying about somebody else, who might, depending on how emotionally invested they are in, whatever local lies going on. But in a lot of like these like hard totalitarian countries, people basically know that the press is lying, but that's, they just kind of know it. And it's everyone kind of knows it. It's almost like an open secret. They just, you just know that that's what the party line is, and okay, that's what we're supposed to believe. The unified kayfabe theory of Trump is different in that they do want you to believe it. Like, it does actually matter that you're invested in, when Trump says something, And, if Trump says that hydroxychloroquine works and it cures COVID and you're just not giving it out because you're deep staters, that's the narrative. Like they want you to believe that. And it's important to them that you get in on that vibe. And if you're not, even if it's proven not to work, God knows, I mean, they might come up with some narrative that they changed the COVID virus just to make Trump look bad. And so hydroxychloroquine stopped working against it. But it doesn't matter. Like, all that it matters is that you believe it to stay in the system, because whatever the writers of the, unified Trump Kayfabe, show want to put out, and Trump's generally the author of it. I mean, sometimes he'll change up the storylines, but, usually you see people react to events, whereas, Trump really just has a narrative and he tries to push the events through the narrative and just tell whatever story needs to be told that kind of fits with the narrative, which is why they generally dismiss things as, or they come up with conspiracy theories, dismiss them as fake news, say it's not true. By just saying it's fake news, you're basically saying it doesn't exist within our story structure. So that's all it is. It's not even whether or not it's fake, it's whether or not it belongs in our narrative. And this is Trump's way of pushing things out of the narrative for, his people. But also, we outside that bubble are affected by that. Humans have a limited amount of deception that they can kind of actively, keep running before we ingest it. Like, you can kind of take something and say, oh, this is a game, this is a lie, I'm wearing a mask, this is a temporary thing, I'm in hiding, this is Halloween, I'm a pirate, kind of a thing. You can be a Halloween pirate for like a night. If you dress like a pirate 24/7, you always talk like a pirate, you engage with other people as though you are a pirate and they know you're a pirate, and maybe they're other pirates or they're, whatever. Humans don't have a limited or limitless ability to separate fact and fantasy, especially dumber people. One kind of a marker of high intelligence is your capacity for deception. So being able to look at multiple streams of possibility and seeing what would be effective as a false narrative. Dumb people don't really have quite so much of that capacity. So they really can't hold things to be simultaneously true in their head at the same time for very long. Really quickly, they tend to just adapt to that's the new reality. So that's kind of where we're at right now, with this structure that has not only taken over a lot of the right and really reformatted the GOP base. Trump has narratives that he knows are compatible with either what they want to believe or what they're willing to believe, and has just kind of built that up around so that that is now this dominant like mind sphere that they just operate in. And things that don't belong in the sphere, they just reject as fake news. They come up with some conspiracy theory, they push it out so that they can all stay in character together and keep the kayfabe going. But for those of us on the outside, it has a corrupting influence on what's real. And if that sphere gets too big, eventually, the danger here is that at some point it gets past the point where it can be resisted. Like right now, you can opt in or opt out, but that's just a function of how big it is. If it was smaller, it wouldn't be as much of a threat. But as it gets larger and larger, people run out of ability to actually, resist it and push back. Like at some point, he can say fake news and make real news disappear. And that's the real threat of this kind of system, is that when people are incentivized or unable to resist it, it starts overwriting reality in ways that make it hard to know what's true and what's not true. Like even when Trump is up there talking in these press conferences and just like basically things that are not truthfully sustainable one after the other, just the act of sitting there and trying to have to troubleshoot him, if he tells 50 lies and you troubleshoot 25, if another 25 get past you, it sinks onto you. Like it basically, you wind up internalizing it without realizing it. And you start to think, well, if that's only half true, then maybe that's true. When even if it's 95% not true, he's getting a bargain if he's getting you to buy into half of it. And that's really the goal, is to just keep hammering away and hammering away at people's resistance, because he's never going to break character. He really is the character. It's kind of, he's like the writer and the hero of his own story, but he's also the writer for a lot of other people's stories. And you'll see when people talk to him and are interviewed that have met him, they'll say that he gives you all of his attention. You become the most interesting person in the room while he's talking to you. And a lot of that's a function of him absorbing you as a narrative piece and figuring out where you fit. And from there, he can figure out if he could use you, like basically what your function is, and if there's a way to have you service the storyline. So he's, you know, by all accounts, great at interviewing people and kind of talking to them and figuring out what makes them tick. It's kind of a superpower. But there's a real mechanical reason for it, and that is that people have varying degrees of utility to him, and he's really good at figuring out, are you a rising star? Are you somebody on the way out? Are you just irrelevant? Are you a threat to me? Like, kind of, where do you fit into the world? And then from there, where do you fit into my storyline, the one that I built for everybody? So that's the long and short of it. And again, hat tip to Eric Weinstein for mentioning that on, I think it was Rogan, and which is the same episode where you know, Joe came out and said that he was a buster. And it was an interesting episode if you guys get a chance to watch it. But I think that this is just kind of where I would differ with him, is that it's not just Trump, it's everybody in that sphere. It's all the, you know, the people online, the Diamond and Silks, the Hannitys, the Laura Ingrams, the Charlie Kirks, all the people who are helping maintain that information infrastructure, and then everybody who, you know, gets that dissemination. Like everyone that hears Trump, that hears his subordinates, that hears all of the other folks out there, they're all in on an act, which is why they're all sort of talking the same way and reacting the same way. So this is an interesting problem that we have to deal with. And again, it's not exactly a cult. It's more of this weird, like, cosplay where you get to go to the, you know, like they're at this permanent convention and they're just living it up. Just, I don't know. It's fucking weird, man. It's fucking weird. Some weird shit. Anyway, nice talking to you guys. Good to see you.